Welcome to the Fiber Optic Center's Jazz Podcast Series with your host, Dave Reis, one of the area's foremost authorities on the South Coast jazz scene from the post-World War II years to today. The South Coast Artists Index thanks the Fiber Optic Center for their continued support of the arts on the South Coast and underwriting this 10-part jazz podcast series. Your host, Dave Reis, will help preserve the memory and legacy of the jazz artists coming to and from the South Coast and how they helped to shape what jazz is today. And now, Dave Reis.
Hello, I'm Dave Reis, jazz podcast host for South Coast Artists Index. And this is into my 9th podcast, and I've had some wonderful guests. I'm doing the podcast for the memory and legacy of music and musicians that came from or came to the South Coast. And today I have a daughter of one of the most famous musicians here in New Bedford that backed up a lot of musicians, gave lessons to a lot of musicians who became very successful. He was born here in New Bedford, and he was a great clarinetist. And a lot of musicians said he was the best clarinetist they heard, local musicians. He played saxophone, clarinet, composer, arranger, and music teacher. And he had after he was on the road, he came back, had a music teaching school, and a lot of our musicians learned from him. He studied at the New England Conservatory, Boston Conservatory, Berklee School of Music, Southeastern Massachusetts University. And I'm fortunate I had met his daughter just a couple of weeks ago. I never knew her. When she told me who her dad was, that I have her here. I invited her to be a guest and tell us what it was like in that era. And I'm going to tell you about other musicians. Carol, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'm so glad I met you. I'm so excited about this.
I'm glad I met you.
Okay. Can you tell us some of your experiences? In fact, you traveled with your dad too, right?
Yes, my brother Carl and I and my mother traveled with my dad. He played for the Sullivan brothers out of New York, and we would travel from May to the end of September up through New York and all through Canada. And we traveled with the Rockettes, Pat Boone,
Wow.
Hoppo Marx, who talked to me, and I was surprised he could talk. He said, Carol, Ralph Hyde is here. Ralph Hyde was a young xylophone player from Switzerland. That was excellent. He was a child prodigy. I not only learned a lot about music and how people supported one another, but I learned about World War II. And because of that, Lena that sewed for the Rockettes, she sewed for the Rockettes. I said to her, is that called tattoos? And then she told me what happened to her. And she said they would give her cold water to drink and her stomach would hurt for hours. And I said, then why did you drink it, being a young girl? I said, why did you drink it? And she said, sometimes we didn't get water for 3 days. And then she said, but God got me out, and God brought you to me, and God's going to bring special people to you. Keep your heart open, Carol. You're going to meet special people. And now I met you. Mm-hmm. And I feel all my life from her saying that I meet very nice people. And
yes, I can imagine. And traveling with your dad all over the place, he met people from everywhere.
Yes, and the camaraderie between the musicians was,
yes.
They all gave each other encouragement, and they were proud of each other. It was really nice to see.
Yes, it was. And that's why I have this history of jazz, is because my uncle was Joe Livamento, and he told me, he toured you, your dad. He told me your dad was the best clarinet player in music. He always said that. He says Lionel was. And so what happened, I was brought up by my grandparents. I was the first grandchild, first nephew, so they called me the baby brother. And then he and Paul Gonzalez was from Rhode Island. Paul came to New Bedford and he lived with us. So when everybody went to work, we let my grandfather bought a tenement house and my aunts, everybody, all family in each tenement. And so when everybody went to work, those two guys were home. They're being musicians. They didn't go to work, so they took me everywhere with them at all the sessions, and we'd go to Mass Ave. They'd be, in the summer, they'd go up to Mass Ave and hang around on the street talking to all the musicians from New York. They all hung out. Mass Ave was big. And so, in fact, later on, before he passed away, he retired, and he came back from New Bedford came back to New Bedford. He was living in New York for years. He ended up, he was playing with Machito, and he had gone up there. He played with Roy Eldridge, different bands. And so when he came back and is retired, I'd go visit him every Friday. We'd be talking, and I'd be telling him, what happened to this man? He said, man, we didn't know you were paying attention. So you had the same situation. You were traveling with your dad, so you heard them talking, and
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have to say this. When we stopped, my brother started high school, so my father stopped traveling with the Sullivan brothers. So I go through high school, everything. I get married. I go with my husband and I go with a couple up to Warwick Music Theater. I'm sitting there looking at the band. I tell my girlfriend, I know the trombone player. He used to travel with us with the bands. So at intermission, I went backstage and I said, please tell Joe Silvera Carol Louro is here. He comes running out with his arms open. He not only was happy to see me and asked how my parents were, he said, Carol, after the show, go to Cello's, get a table, I'll find you. He met us at Cello's, and after that, he hooked up with my parents again, and they stayed friends and would get together until the end of my father's life, and it was so nice. And then there was another musician, Andy Andrade. He was in California. He played for Johnny Carson and everybody. And he would call, and I'd put him on speaker, and he would tell stories about my father to my grandchildren, and they would love hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was another great sax player, and he said, I always played for a sax, but when your father had the gig, he played for a sax, and I never cared because he was great. And then he said, shut up, Lionel, I can say this, because my father didn't like to be talked like that. Yeah. Because it's true what my father said. Everybody has talent in their own ways.
Yes.
You can't really compare people.
Right. Especially in a not like jazz, where it's improvisation, Then a lot of them aren't reading that stuff. It's them. What they're playing, it's them. And your dad was also a great musician, but when he came back, he started his school of music, and he taught so many successful musicians. Could you name some of them?
Ricky Brito.
Yes, Ricky Brito. And in fact, let's talk about Rick Brito. Very successful. After studying your dad, he went on tour. He went all over the country. He was living on the West Coast, and he played with locally. He played here with Marcel Gauvin, John Harrison, Chris Poudre, Bruce Getz, all the best players here in the area, and also all over New England. He taught. Then he became a teacher. He became a great teacher. He taught younger students locally. Band directors for New Bedford and Old Rochester Regional High School bands asked him for help. He went in and helped the kids in the studio there, and he published a lot of shows, and he also had his own little record company. Unfortunately, he passed away at an early age. And he went to the West Coast. He played with these all big stars. He played with Ray Brown. They were on the same gig together, but no, they didn't play together, but they were on the same gig. Monty Alexander, Rosemary Clooney, Dick Johnson, Dave McKenna, the Alex Shaw Band, Buddy Rich Band, and Count Basie. That's Rick. That was your father's student.
Yes.
So not only he accomplished things, his students accomplished so much,
Well, my father used to say, you're a good teacher when you guide your student. You're a great teacher when your student does better than you, goes on further than you.
Yeah, well, he definitely was. I mean, the proof is there. And then...
And one of the last albums Ricky wrote, one of the songs was Lionel. And he talked about my father. They played the song, and then when they were done, they looked up and said, "Shut up, Lionel, we're talking about you. You can't do anything about it now." Because my father would constantly say, "Please don't talk about me. It's not important what you do, it's who you are."
Yeah.
And they studied my father's music at Brown University, The Child's Dream. And he wrote a song, "The Days of Spring Are Here Again," and Eddie Poto sang it. Eddie Poto sang it.
Yeah.
And he wrote a Hail Mary that they played at Bishop staying in a lot of churches.
Really good. Yes. Again, I'm so glad I met you. Unfortunately, where I met you was in the happy place of Danny Schwartz, our famous percussionist, wake where I met you, and you told me that was your dad. I said, I got to have her come on talk, right? Because I could mention him, but I couldn't tell the things that you're telling,
But, musicians have such a big heart. I was at the Bucket after my dad died. My father was only sick 2.5 weeks. And about a month later, I was at the Bucket, and the Beaver Brown Band was playing. So I went up to say hello to Jackie Santos, the famous drummer.
Yep.
And he said, "Carol, is it all right if I go to your house Wednesday with Sherry?" And I said, "Yes." And I didn't know why he wanted to come to my house. I was surprised. Well, when he came to my house and we settled down and, had coffee, he said, "Please, I want to know how your father passed. He was fine before I went away. I came back and everybody's telling me Lionel's gone." And I thought, what a big heart. He didn't want to ask me in public. He came to the house to ask me what happened to my father.
Yes.
And that just shows.
But that's how musicians were. And I have something I can tell you is after I retired from work, my wife and I used to go to Dunkin' Donuts every morning, and your mom and dad would be coming in from church. And the first thing he always told me, "I said a prayer for your Uncle Joe Livamento." And then he said a prayer for every musician, he said, when they went to Mass.
Yes.
That was the first thing he would tell me. But I'm so glad to have you telling us all these stories. But Jackie Santos is another success.
Oh, yes.
He played with Tavares, but then after that he went to Berklee, and then he's been teaching at Berklee. I don't know if he's retired, but he traveled with a lot of bands around the country.
Yes, he
That's
did.
another success story. Yeah.
My father was very proud of him.
Yeah.
And my father looked up to him very much. And it always touched my heart that he came to the house to ask me like that. That showed. And if I ran into him years ago, and I told my father, I ran into a musician, Jackie Santos. He said to say hello, and he said, "You're a great sax player, Dad." And he said, "Jackie's saying that about me? Do you know what kind of a drummer he is? He's great." Right? Yeah. And it was just, I don't know, the love and the camaraderie that the musicians have.
That's what I love. I was able to have you do this because I know this, because I drum like you. We had the same situation. We were around it, but a lot of people don't know this, and I'm glad you're saying it for me. Yeah.
All right. Well, like the Skyliners, my father's the theme song. My father wrote the theme song for the Skyliners. It was Carol, and not because of me, because of Pete's daughter's name was Carol, yes. I believe, right?
Yeah.
And they had just so much respect for one another.
Yeah, well, see, they knew what they went through, and a lot of them, those were the only friends they had, and then they'd be friends, but one got a gig in New York, another got in Pittsburgh. They didn't see each other for the longest time, I can remember my Uncle Joe Livamento played, before he retired, he was with Machito for many years, but he had played with Roy Eldridge. He and Barbosa got called from Boston, to Roy Eldridge, Then he played at the Apollo Theater, the house band, for a long time, you know. And I could remember guys from New York would be coming in to play here at the Piccadilly, and they were from New York. He was from New York. They would say, "Hey, how's your Uncle Joe? I haven't seen him for 5 years. I haven't seen him because they're on the road all the time, so they don't see each other. If they're not in the same band, they don't see each other, and they're on the move. You know, it's not that like that, and that's why Joe LaMotta took the job in Machito and stayed there, because they played at the Palladium, New York, downtown New York, and it was continuous music. Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, and Machito. One band would finish, the other one would play, and people would dance. So he stayed in New York. He didn't have to travel, and he stayed with that band. And then he went with Candido, the conga player, and then he retired, came back to this area. But they don't know when they're going to see each other again, you know?
I know.
And they claim, like in the old days when they used to travel by bus all the time, the only time they see each other, like if Duke Ellington's bus was at the highway at the rest area, Count Basie's bus might come by, and they said, Joe said sometimes they play softball or something for a few minutes while they're there. So that's why they have that camaraderie, because they don't know when they're going to see each other again. And the friend this week is the band they're playing in, and the friends next week, they might be playing in another band, you know, if they weren't playing in the permanent orchestra. Yeah.
You know, I think I have a young man that he does my gardening. He was a musician. His name's Sean, and he went cross country with his band, mm-hmm. and they sold like 30,000 CDs. He did really well. But we go to eat at a diner, and it reminds us of the olden days when we traveled with the bands. We'd stop at 1 in the morning, have pancakes, because after the gig was over, it was time to pack up and go to the next town. Right. And we always stopped for coffee and pancakes, and that was the life of musicians.
Yeah. So they never knew when they were going to see each other again, you know, because a lot of them didn't have a steady job. They worked with this band for maybe 6 weeks, and another gig would be another band, and it might be in the West Coast. So, you know, they didn't know we were going to see each other again after a certain gig, you know. And then it was tough then, too, because the jazz bands are on the road, Duke and Count Basie and all of them. They be doing a lot of traveling and all that, but when they traveled a lot of places, they couldn't find a place to sleep. You know, the racial thing was bad. They had to sleep on a bus. They even, in some places, they would sleep in funeral parlors. They'd come into town overnight. If funeral parlor was empty, they'd use it so they could sleep. You know, so it was a tough situation.
Yeah, my father would tell us the stories of it, and it would upset him when you think about it. I have my cousin Barry actually played with Tavaz, Barry Floor.
Oh yeah.
Plays bass. You know Barry?
Yeah, I know who he is.
Yes.
But I remember. Yeah.
I used to be his babysitter, but you know the second time we started traveling with the big bands, my brother said, "I'm not going to watch the show in backstage. Let's go sit in the stadium," because we lived in the middle of a racetrack. And they had the Hell Drivers, and they used to have horse racing. So we're sitting in the stadium. This man comes out singing. Everybody's screaming. They get out of their seats. They run across the racetrack up to the stage. I said, "Carl, who is that?" He says, "I don't know, but let's go backstage." It was Pat Boone.
Oh, is that it? Wow.
It was Pat Boone, and he was so nice. He gave us pictures to Carl and Carol from Pat Boone.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, it was a different style life than the guy going to 8 to 5 job.
Well, you know, we never talked about it. And when I wrote my book, From Music to Macrobiotics, my friends in school, this young boy that was our age at the time, he was a protege. He played the xylophone. He played for the Queen of England. He was from Switzerland. He became very close to my brother and I because that's all we had.
Right.
We're traveling. Yeah. And he stayed at our house. The newspaper did a big article about him, and he gave a concert at DeMello School in Dartmouth. And then from there, he went on the Mickey Mouse show. But we never really talked about what we did. And then when I wrote my book, so many of my friends said, we knew you traveled with the big bands, with the Rockettes, with Ralph, but we really never thought about it because we just lived the life. Ralph came, gave a concert. We were happy to meet him. And we look back now, it was unique. It was different.
Yes. People don't realize that they don't just go to work, play the horn, and go home. What they went through. And and when they toured certain parts of the country, they just slept on the bus. Duke Ellington, who could afford it, one tour, he rented a train so they could, after the gig, sleep on the train as they traveled instead of in the bus. And I can remember, and the bus driver, they'd be in this city, as soon as they finished in another city. And I remember Paul saying when they played the Duke's band, most everybody stayed awake at night when they got on the bus because they were afraid the bus driver was going to fall asleep because poor guy's been driving all. So they they played cards or something and they stayed up all night, so they didn't get good sleep, and they were ready for the next gig, And it's so many musicians that came through New Bedford or came from New Bedford in that era that we saw them all. And then too, because of the racial situation, we got to see them all here in New Bedford because they had to play in dance halls. They played one night as they got off the bus. They were in New Bedford. They got up, finished today, got off the bus. They went in Providence the next day. So when they got into a town, they wanted to meet people. They socialize them. And they loved New Bedford because of the hospitality in New Bedford. They got served. They got invited for dinner, and so we got to see them because they had to come to New Bedford. The promoters would find a hall, and they'd have a schedule in town, and that's where they would play. One hall last night might have been a beautiful place. The place the promoter could find today was a dump. If you go Route 18, when you go to Route 18, see that big white building, the church? There used to be Sharpshooters Hall. And the rhythm and blues, not only jazz, rhythm and blues came through all the time. These promoters would put it on. Promoters of music at the time were numbers men. The guys that play, they ran the numbers, just like the black baseball and that was that. They were the ones, and they go through city to city with it. So Bo Diddley, Fats Domino, Duke Ellington, Basie, everybody played in that Sharpshooters Hall. It was a basketball place. That's why it's called Sharpshooters Hall. And they played in there. Fats Domino. I never had a funny story. One time, we were high school kids. Me and two friends were there, and Bo Diddley was there. And when they'd come in, it would be a series. It'd be 4 or 5 acts. They'd be a tour. Each one would sing. So then they were going to a next tour, and my friend and I, we were standing there when the job was over, getting ready to go, and Bo Diddley walks up to us, and this is how he talked. He says, Bo Diddley would like to know if you would give Bo Diddley a ride to Providence. He says, I have to get a train because this tour is going on, but I'm not going with him. So we said, no, my friend had a car. He said, my father won't let me drive to Providence this time at night. So we dropped him off at a hotel downtown, and he stayed and waited for the train the next day. So like sometimes 5 groups would be playing tonight in New Bedford, but when that gig was over, 2 of them might be going to another city, so they would split up. So their traveling system was bad. And so they loved New Bedford because the hospitality, Cape Verdean ladies liked to cook, and they'd be hanging out, I could have a meal. And then the guys, there was this group of guys, the Gaylords. They called themselves the Gaylords, the guys that hung around New Bedford, and they had a club.
My father played with the Gaylords.
Oh, yeah. So they had a club. So they would invite a lot of these guys after the gig. So they played at Piccadilly, and they'd be here for a week. So after they left the Piccadilly, go to the Gaylords Club and have a jam session. And I'd be sitting there watching them. All famous names.
Piccadilly Lounge.
Yeah. So when I could be in New York when I was a teenager. When Joe and Paul moved to New York, they'd always send for me. But I couldn't go to the gigs, because I was a teenager. But during the day, they'd go to the Union Hall, New York Union Hall, Roseland Ballroom. During the day, all the musicians hang out there and get their pays and all that. And I'd be sitting there with them. So I met a lot of them, but didn't hear them because I was too young to see them at night, unless they played at a hall, if they played at places. And then I'd be sitting there, and they'd come up, where you from, man? I says, Massachusetts, Boston. I said, no, New Bedford. New Bedford? I got to get a gig there. I got to get another gig there. I heard about those women there. Cape Verdean women, I would hear that when I mentioned New Bedford. They loved it when they came here because they got treated well, opposed to where they had just come places where they'd sleep in the bus and all that. And the musicians would play, the Gaylords, they would play with them after our sessions.
In the New Bedford book, they've got the Gaylord picture of the Gaylords in there.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do a section about my father, and my father didn't like that.
Yeah.
And so it says that the Soares family gave the pictures. I gave a lot of pictures of the Skyliners and Pete Montero.
Yeah.
It's so much more fun when you talk about this person, that person, that person, that person.
Right.
Because they all have different funny stories to tell.
Right.
And they're all got their wonderful talent.
That's why, again, I've said over there, I was so thrilled to meet somebody from that era because I have nobody to talk to it about. I'll do a podcast, but you know what I'm talking. You know the experiences, and it's just such a thrill to bring back those memories of those guys, and they all got along well, because but yeah, I mentioned New Bedford, man. I suppose a lot of places where they just would get back on the bus, but when they at the Piccadilly, they were here for a whole week. So they got to know, and during the day they'd hang out with the guys, because they were here for the whole week and do different things. And so they got to know New Bedford. The hospitality was good for them here. And a lot of musicians came from here. So when you mentioned that guy's name, they knew who he was.
Yeah, my father would bring his musician friends home at 1:30 in the morning and 2 o'clock. And they'd tell my mother, hurry up, Sarah, make the coffee. We're hungry. Make the sandwiches.
Well, my wife and I, when first got, we did that because we no kids. And our very first Christmas, there was a trio playing here at the Piccadilly, so they're stuck here. So my wife says, let's invite them over, because I'd invite them over during the day to listen to music, and so we all over for Christmas. And she worked at City Hall Veterans Department, but her boss, Doc Coimbra.
Okay.
Doc Coimbra was her boss, but he was the president of the Musicians Union. So she's at work, with the Veterans Office. And she's telling him, we're going to have the trio come over. And he met them because he was the head of the union. So he'd have to meet every group that came in, make sure that dues were paid when they came to the pick. He said, they're nice guys. He said, you know what, ask your husband if they would like to play at the House of Correction at Union Street when the old House of Correction for the people there, for the prisoners, for Christmas afternoon after you guys have dinner. So I asked them. And they said, yeah, sure. And they got paid. So, but it's funny. So we're walking in the House of Correction, me, Doc Coimbra, and the trio, and we're walking down, and everybody's sitting in the audience, and I hear, Reis. Piano player says, are your friends in jail? So we did that. We brought them there on the Christmas afternoon. And, but everybody, they get invited to different houses, and they get invited, like the musicians, to gig after hours. And over here was early for them because most of our stuff was done at 12. They were used to playing in places where 2 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the morning. And I never forget. And so whenever guys from New York would come and Joe or Paul knew it, they would tell them to call me. And so so one day I get a call. I said, hi, how you doing? I said, I'm Eric Dixon. He played for Count Basie. I'm Eric Dixon. Joe Liverwurst told me to call his nephew. So whenever they come to this area, they get in touch with me right away because Paul or him would give us our phone number, get me to introduce it to people, move around, So, but New Bedford, with a lot of great music came out of here.
New Bedford has so much talent, not only music, art.
Yes. Exactly. I'll name some of the musicians from that time. Duke Oliver. Mm-hmm. And when Duke left the band, it became the Skyliners. That was originally the Duke Oliver, but he gave it up, and Pete Montero took it over, and the Skyliners. Then there was Phil Barboza. He also was known as Phil Edmond. He had a big band, and they played Martha's Vineyard every summer. And quite a band guys in his band. But a lot of the guys in his band were from Boston and New Bedford. A big portion was from Boston. What happened? Most of our musicians that went on, they went on out of Boston. I drive over to Boston in the summer, hang out, and they'd get gigs. There was a band, Sabby Lewis, the most popular band, and they would get gigs there, and some guys from New York were in the band. And so that's how I got discovered. Like Paul was playing with Sabby Lewis, and Count Basie needed his sax player quickly. And the guy in the band called Sabby Lewis, called Paul Gonsalves. That's how Paul left New Bedford. And Joe and Phil Edmond, who also was, his real name was Phil Barboza, but he had a band, he called it the Phil Edmond Band. They got called, same thing, they were playing in Boston, Sabby, and they got called by Roy Eldridge. He needed to, and so the connection was there. The guys from New York used to love to come to Boston, Mass Ave, because there were just different clubs. There was Wally's. There's a Wally's there now in recent years. It's a kind of barroom, but the original Wally's was a hotel. And this numbers man owned it, but it had money they were a number of men because they didn't have no jobs. He owned it and he had rooms, so the guys from New York would come and do a gig there, and he let them stay a couple of nights in the rooms. So Mass Ave became their hangout. So the Boston and New York musicians became friends right there through there. Like Phil Edmond, he had a couple of guys from his band got called from him here, Martha's Vineyard, because somebody in New York needed a drummer. Roy Haynes, one of the most famous drummers, he was a teenager when he was in the band. They called from him. And Chick Corea says when he was a youngster, he learned Latin music playing for this Portuguese band, Portuguese band leader, who taught him about Latin music. His band taught him about Latin music, and that was Phil Edmond, Phil Barboza, and then Chick Corea went on to be one of the most famous. But he said that's where he played jazz, but he got that Latin through the Cape Verdean music, and that's how he started. So there's a lot of history here, and then those Boston guys would come here to play. A lot of Sunday afternoons, you'd have a guy, for the famous guys that were in Boston, but they got to know the New Bedford guys, so they have a jam session here. And Sunday afternoon, and they come down, do the jam session. Then I remember 6 o'clock, we'd be rushing, driving them up to get the bus so they could get their regular gig that night, So the connection was there. New Bedford was known in like New York, jazz musicians. Yeah. So
and it was a lot of work for musicians.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a nice career. It's a very nice career. It's playing music and everything, but it could be tiring for them late at night.
Right. And then a lot of them, if they weren't in a band like Duke, they didn't know if they had a job 2 weeks from now.
Right.
Yeah. They're doing a gig for now. And like when they do come through New Bedford, they'd be on a tour. When that tour ended, they were out of work. And also they were playing with a guy maybe for months, and then he got a job somewhere else when that tour ended, and so they didn't see each other again for a long time. But they were doing what they enjoyed.
Yes.
But that's why. And Joe Livamento, he was doing that. He and Paul and all that. Then he found out he could play Latin music. He could work every day, and that's what happened. He went with Proprietor, and then Livamento. Everybody, Cape Verdeans, they didn't know where we were whenever we left New Bedford. When I was in Ham, they couldn't figure out what we were. But anyway, so he got in, and then he ended up getting the job with Machito, and that was a steady job, same place every day. So he didn't do that. He gave up that tour. And like most of his friends were out to be jazz. He said, no, man. He says, I love my jazz, but I'm out to have a job where I make money every day. So I'll play where I get paid. Right. So that's why he did that. But he played jazz on the side, but he didn't do that for a living. And a lot of those guys did. In fact, they'd go a few weeks without a job. Their hand was in a pawn shop. They'd pawn their hands. They weren't working. And then when they were at a gig, I can remember a famous musician. I won't name when I was in this house in the apartment. Guy came over, a famous one. He said, Joe, can I borrow your alto? I have a recording gig. Can I borrow your alto? And I get this gig, then I can get money to take mine out of the pawn shop. So they were doing it for love because they had, and then unfortunately, drugs. The drug situation, a lot of guys. Paul got hooked up on drugs right away when he got there.
Oh, my father would tell us when he played down south, he said many times they'd say, Lionel, try this. He says, I'm glad I was scared. I'd say, I'm sticking with my beer. And he lost many musician friends to overdosing.
That's what happened to Paul Gonsalves. Paul was a very nice man. He would please anybody if you ask him to do something like that. And as soon as he got with Basie's band, I'm not naming the musician, got him on heroin right away, offered him, and he took it. And he died 50-something years old. He died of an overdose.
Yeah.
And he would have been a much more famous musician. But because of that, he had to stay with Duke because he got a lot of gigs. He got Duke just kept him, you know. And then he helped Duke out because Duke's orchestra, big bands, but period, weren't working that much anymore. And there was another thing. And then the Newport Jazz Festival, you heard of that that solo. Paul took that solo, went on, and that made Duke. Right after that, I had Duke on Time Magazine, on the cover of Time Magazine because of that. And so Duke kept him because a lot of times he didn't even make it to work, or he didn't have his horn. But the ironic story about that Newport Jazz Festival, Paul was known for ballads. In fact, Stan Getz, Coleman Hawkins, they all said he was the best ballad player in that. And I believe that was because he started out with his father and his brothers playing Cape Verde music, guitar. He was playing guitar. And they played Cape Verde, what they call modern, as we say. That's ballad music stuff. It's a blues type. And that's what he knew. And I say that's why he was such a good ballad player, because that was a modern. He was playing the modern. So what happened, when he was young, they had the group, the Don Verdi, and there was a small group from guys from the Skyliners, and they couldn't find a guitar player because Cape Verde music had nothing to do with jazz. They had the Ultramarine Band Club, so they would teach the kids every Saturday how to read music. And then when the kid could read well enough, they'd give him a horn. They were a marching band. So all those guys, none of them were guitar players. They didn't play Cape Verde music. In fact, they used to say, "Man, I don't play that geeky music." They were cool.
Yeah.
So Joe, when they had the Don Verdi, couldn't find it. They wanted a guitar player. There was nobody play guitar, young guys, except the men from Cape Verde Islands. So our family knew Paul's family, and he lived in Pawtucket. So my uncle asked, and so they would let him come stay with my grandmother every weekend and play with, he'd be the guitar player. So every Saturday he would come. So one Saturday he comes with a saxophone. He says, "I'm not playing sax anymore. I have to listen to you guys. I want to play jazz." So they lost their guitar player, and he became their famous sax player. And the story thing. So that long solo was because this woman was dancing, and he kept playing. She kept dancing, so he kept playing because that was pretty short. But he kept playing. But the story is, the sax player was from New Bedford. They didn't know each other. The woman that was dancing was from New Bedford. Again, New Bedford's jazz history. She was one of the Zeitz family, the Zeiterians.
Oh, wow.
She was a Zeitz lady, and the running reason why they didn't stop her from dancing, the Newport Jazz Festival started with the wealthy people of New York, and she was married to a man that owned Anderson Little. Well, they had homes in Newport, so they got a hold of George Wein, the piano player and the head of the nightclub in Boston, and they asked him to put a show together for them for Newport one summer. So he did. He got a lot of musicians, put it together. So then that's when he got the idea. He told them we should have this a festival for everybody. So that's how the Newport Jazz Festival started. So there was the woman that was dancing.
I didn't know that.
And Paul playing was from New Bedford. Yeah, she was the Zeitz family.
I like that.
Yeah.
Now, Music Week, my dad was in charge of Music Week.
Yes.
Jazz, yes. That was a nice.
Yeah. Oh, I should
That was
have. I have a picture
big.
with Joe Livimento Quartet playing on a Wednesday night. It was all week. They played. He had Teddy Betancourt on drums,
Yes.
Manu Rose on bass, Mike Silva on piano.
Yep.
And then when he left to go to New York, Eddie Stack would come from Newport and sit in, and he called Eddie Stack, "Why don't you take my band over?" So Eddie said, "I can't take the drums. I got to keep my drummer." He said, "We grew up together." So that quartet was the quartet. And then Eddie Stack kept it. Eddie was from Newport.
Yeah, and he played for my father Music Week.
Yeah.
He says, "I'm going to be there. I'll be there on time, but it's going to be right at the last minute, Lionel."
Yeah.
And my father just knew he would be there on time.
Yeah. I'll tell you I mentioned Teddy Betancourt. I'll tell you another story people don't know. Pearl Bailey and Louis Belson. Louis Belson was Duke's drummer, and Pearl Bailey was a great singer. But interracial marriage was not a thing at that time. And they got married in in Europe. And Teddy Betancourt, he had a drum set just like Louis Belson's. He was Louis Bellson was his idol, and Louis would come in with Duke. They'd hang out together, Joe, Paul, and Teddy Betancourt would hang out. So when Pearl Bailey and Louis Bellson got married in Europe, Duke was playing in Europe, it was all over the news, and they were waiting for them to come, and all the press was waiting for Duke to get back to New York. So their first gig in the United States before they went back to New York was in New Bedford, at Sharpshooters Hall. It was right there. So Teddy Betancourt, so now they're waiting for New York for them to come, the press and all that. And they went there. Louis Bellson and Pearl Bailey didn't come. They honeymooned here in New Bedford. They were hiding in Teddy Betancourt's apartment up the North End, right by Sunbeam. Oh. New Bedford's got a lot of history in jazz, man.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
New Bedford's got a lot of famous musicians, artists, too. Teddy Betancourt was in a group with my dad, and he's got the picture in the book, the New Bedford
he was a
books.
photographer. Teddy.
Yes.
He was a photographer, yeah.
But I mean, he's...
No, I'm saying he would have the picture because he was a photographer, yeah. Besides playing drums, he lived up by Coffin Avenue. So Louis Bellson and Pearl Bailey honeymooned here in New Bedford.
Wow.
Yeah.
We lived at Del Coronado in California. My father played there, and it was really nice. We go visit it now and then. We've gone a few times to visit it. But my father always wanted to come home. He just didn't want the limelight.
Right, yeah.
He loved his music, loved writing music.
And I was lucky for New Bedford musicians because he started such a great school of music. Your dad, all these guys that, a success because of that. So they were lucky that he came back.
I had a teacher after, and I don't know his name. He was a musician. I wish I knew. I was out eating, and he came up to me, and he said, "I'll never forget your father." I told him, "Mr. Soares, I can't, I'm not born with the talent of music." And your father said to me, "Do you want to play the sax?" He said, "Yes." He said, "You don't need talent. All you need is to have the desire in your heart, work hard at it and practice, and sometimes you can surpass people with talent." He said, "Look at me now. I have students. I'm helping them, and all from what your father said to me. We can do anything we want in life. Just work at it."
Mm-hmm. See? Yeah, so he helped a lot of people were lucky that he came back. Yeah. Mentioned a few other musicians. Phil Barboza was Phil Edmond. He had a band. He and the Skyliners, and Joe Senna was another. They were the first bands, in the way back in the
Lindy Duat.
Right. Yeah. And so Phil in the million, he just had to make money and save money. And he got into New York. He got into insurance business, real estate. He ended up, when he retired, his wife got sick. She was from New York, but he moved her to the Hyannis, and they had this unbelievable estate with guest houses. And then he ended up being in charge of Cape Cod Melody, the talent there. But so his band, he was Phil Barboza. Then he went under the Phil Edmond on his band, like his Chick Corea played with him. And most of his gigs were in Boston. He would do the Boston along with Sabby Lewis Orchestra. He had Jimmy Lomba.
Oh, yes.
Jimmy Lomba, famous baritone player, went in New York, played with Dinah Washington and a lot of other music. And there was, we mentioned Eddie Stack. Then Jimmy Lomba's brother, Ray Lomba, he's the one that got the guy started to play jazz because, like I said, they had the Ultramarine Band Club, and they're playing it. And then he is piano player. He said, "Hey, you guys, we got all these instruments. Why don't we play jazz?" Because they would hear Duke Ellington and company. So it was big bands in those days. So they formed a big band. And then who else besides them at that time? It was Joe Senna, yeah. And I already mentioned Eddie Stack. And they played at different places. You had then when the big bands went out, now we were going to jazz with the combos, quintets and all that, quartet, trios. And they played at the West End Social, the Piccadilly. The Kettle was in the Cushionet.
What about the Hangers?
Yeah.
My father played there for
the
years.
Hangers, I was just going to say that. And they play there. They have jam sessions Sunday afternoons, and some of them, then they play at night. So we had jazz. In fact, on a Sunday afternoon, you'd be running around, you catch a set, and this guy, we got to run down and catch so-and-so, that he's down there, you run around. Opposed to now, there's nothing happening. Yeah.
My father had a little music studio connected to the house, and they had all these music studios, and musicians would say, "Hey, Lionel, how come you send people to Chick Boucher's, or you send them to that?" He says, "Because we all help one another. It's like we just help one another." And my son played drums. He actually went to Lowell, and then he changed his major. And he would go and take lessons at Chick Boucher's, and then Eddie Salk taught my son. He'd come to the house. Eddie Salk would come to my house and teach my son.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. They had to help each other. They knew what the other guy went through. They knew what they went through. Like I said, one guy's horn was in the pawn shop. He borrowed Joe's. They knew that they had to support each other because they had a different lifestyle than the 9-to-5 worker,
And my father knew what went on down south with the musicians, and it would really break his heart with the memories of it.
Well, like Joe Lumento, he, like I said, he went to New York for jazz, but then he said, "No, I want to make a living." So he played any music. So he was on this tour every year. They had all the famous Fats Domino, all the famous rhythm and blues stars. It was a big, huge tour. They traveled all over the country and all that. So he said the people that ran it had to hire some white workers just to travel them so they could go in the restaurants and buy them food, take it out to the bus and stuff like that. That was that person's job, and go in stores in different places and get things for them. Yeah. And there was a funny story. There's one of the musicians, Earl Warren, he played with Count Basie, and he and Paul and Joe had an apartment together, but after Paul got on drugs, he couldn't live with them, and he got upset because they would try to help him, so they would try to help him. So Earl was very light complexion, so when they traveled to the South, sometimes he'd stay in white hotels and go to white restaurants, so his name was White Folks to the guys. Because one day I was sitting with my uncle, and like I said, Rose and Bottom in New York, and they sit around and talk all afternoon. And just one guy, I don't want to say his name, was telling Joe, he says, "Man, I wish white folks would stop saying I got Paul on drugs. I wish white folks." So then the guy said, "Who the hell is white folks?" He said, "Earl." But he would sneak in down south. He'd get in. He'd pass, How bad that was.
It was.
But they did what they loved, and they broke down our roads. They'd break down our roads. Sometimes cops would come and take their instruments from them. They say around Philly, that would happen a lot. In fact, one musician I read that I didn't know about, he said he had guys in his band that played in his band, and when he dropped them off, he dropped them outside of Philly because he was afraid. They would just drop them. And then, like when Malcolm... And if a guy got stuck with drugs, got caught with drugs, the police would be following them all the time. And they said this happened with Billie Holiday. Police would plant drugs in their place and then arrest them again. And when my uncle was playing with Candido, and they were playing as just a quintet, and they were playing in a club in New York, and the piano player gets a phone call, and he goes to get it. And it was a waitress. The waitress told him, don't put your jacket on. He says, they just put something in your coat hanging over there. So once they got booked on drugs, now they would plant them. That's what Billie Holiday was in and out of. They said that Billie Holiday, before she checked in the hotel room, her agents would clean the whole room, make sure there was nothing in there. But they did what they loved. The sacrifice, and that's why Joe got out of it.
Music lifts your heart. My Japanese teacher that taught macrobiotics, he got the Society Writers Award from the United Nations. They put all his works in the Smithsonian Institute. Mm-hmm. Sometimes how I pronounce things is not good.
Yeah.
Well, when people were sick or had a problem, he would say, sing a happy song every day. And they thought he was joking, but no,
Yeah.
he was serious, and they realized it.
Yeah,
Music just lifts your spirits.
it does.
And he would say that, make sure you sing a happy song every day.
Mhm. That's it, and that's how they survive, man. Those guys, like, see, you have places they would sleep in another guy's apartment for a while until they could get back on there, because they didn't get any jobs for a long time. When they were working, it was fine, but they went on tour, and then they come off the tour, they didn't have a job anymore. That tour was over, so their income, yeah. But New Bedford, we have big history in jazz. Not only jazz, dance bands, because it started out with dance bands.
Right.
And then when the dance bands, they couldn't afford dance bands anymore, and the guys had, the answer say, well, let's play. So they played 4 or 5 guys in the band. They couldn't read charts, so they're like a big band, so they improvised.
But what we saw, like my father talked a lot to my brother at dinner. It was just like just the two of them, because he would talk. But what we saw, what we witnessed with the musicians, most of what nothing's perfect, but most of what we witnessed was the camaraderie, how they encouraged one another, how they were, good job, man. Wow, you played that great. What about you? You did a good job.
Yeah, they had to depend on each other, not just like you depend on each other at work and then you go home. They had to depend on each other for to make a living off the stage. To get by off the stage.
Yeah, one time it was Music Week. They had big band night. I went up to Lindy Duat. Remember Lindy Duat? At intermission, and I was like 16. I said, Lindy, I love your trumpet playing. And he just smiled at me. He said nothing, and I just walked off. Yeah. Well, at the end of his life, because he and his wife stayed friends with my parents, at the end of his life, my husband and I would pick them up, go out to eat. After Lindy died, his wife said to me, this is years later, his wife said, every once in a while, Lindy would say, Lionel Soares' daughter likes my trumpet playing. And that just touched my heart. So it's important to say nice things to people.
Yeah. And then, like I said, they needed each other. You and I were hanging out today. We might not see each other for 6 months.
Right.
So we have to enjoy that time, because I'll be on tour with somebody else. I might not be working. You are.
Right.
So that they just enjoyed the time that they had. They have to enjoy that time. So you know how long it was going to be before. Like it's a lot of time guys would come in from New York into the pick there. How's Joe? They're in New York easily.
Yeah.
They have to ask me, how's Joe? But they were living out of here, but a lot of them, they were on the road. They were in the city. They were on the road. So.
And that was a tough life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You have to love it, especially like the jazz musicians, because like I said, Joe said, I'm going to get a job as music. So he ended up playing all kind. He went to be a jazz musician, but when he saw, and then he got married, he had to, and that's why he liked playing with Machito, because he stayed right there in the city. They didn't travel much. They'd go maybe Puerto Rico once in a while on a tour, but basically, they worked every day. They had a job every day. The Palladium.
I think that's why some of them taught. Like that's why my father taught music. He taught sax and clarinet to make a living.
Well, right now, it's only the thing jazz musicians are making. There's no jazz contests anymore. New Bedford, I know where to go. I remember the last time there was something going on. There was something at the Z recently. So they played all the time, but now there's no gigs to play, even, and so most of them are teaching. A lot of the famous musicians that I knew for maybe 10 years, wonder where they are. Then I find out they're teaching at this college or that college, because there's no gigs anymore. Jazz wasn't like it was. There's too many things now for people to do.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway.
But it's a fun life.
Yeah. I mean, it was a great experience. Yeah. Great experience being around them and hearing all these things, But and there was a lot of the places they would come into Eastern Star Temple. That's the Verdian Vets. That was the Eastern Star Temple. A lot of famous musicians came. Because like they say, they're one-night gigs wherever they could find a hall. The promoters would get it. And then the Verdian Vet Spa. Then there was the Verdian Hall with the big names. The band club was weekends, and Sharpshooters Hall. And then the big gigs would be Roseland Ballroom and Taunton. And the promoters they'd have 5 or 6 big names like Bill Dog and places like that. And they would have buses from here in New Bedford. You pay for the bus and the ticket, and which was a lot of money at the time. $5, you get a bus ride to Taunton and come back. And but there was always, every weekend there was somewhere to go. So there was always jobs for the musicians. And like I said, sometimes 3 different guys would be playing different places here in New Bedford. You'd run catch set here and run that, get a little bit about that. There's no more of that now. It's all to make a living, you got to be a teacher. No.
Yes.
It was like Piccadilly 7 nights a week the band played. Now that's gone.
My father played 7 nights a week all our life.
Yeah.
Well, not all our life until he retired.
Yeah.
My mother just supported him. We didn't think anything. It was 7 nights a week he played. 7 nights a week
they would. And that was more than one band, more than one location, it's and now this, like the Scullers in Boston, that was one of the last big clubs. It's in the hotel in Cambridge, and they would bring Miles and guys like that in. They'd come in on Monday, and they were there till Sunday night. And then, in fact, Sunday afternoon, they'd have the afternoon jam session, 2 shows. Now that Scullers, it's there in the hotel. Once in a while, they'll have an artist there. And it was a club for all week, There's no more live jazz. Live jazz is hurting.
My father played at the Mayflower Hotel. We lived there for a while in Washington. Yeah. He played at the Del Coronado in California.
Yeah.
We lived there for a while. Yeah. I can remember that. He played at Ciro's where the Rat Pack hung out. Mm-hmm. But every time they wanted him to be in charge, he quit. He didn't want he walked away from everything. He was like, no, I don't want to. Yeah. He didn't want that. That's why Ricky wrote the song Lionel and told him to shut up. We're talking about you. Can't do anything about it now, Lionel.
Yeah.
But it's true. It's more important who you are.
Exactly.
Love what you do. It's who you are.
Yeah, they're doing it with a passion. They're not doing it because of my job. They had the passion for that.
Musicians do.
To go through all that, what they had to go through, whereas they could have been a music teacher and stay home. But in fact, a lot of good musicians stayed in New Bedford. Manny Rose, bass player, after when he went to play with Eddie Stack after Joe left, and Eddie Stack Quartet would play here, Fall River, Newport. And they would have a guest like Coleman Hawkins. They'd back Coleman Hawkins, Illinois Jacquet. Every Sunday would be a different one. This was in the club in Fall River. And all those bands wanted to take Manny Rose back on the bass. But he wanted his daytime job, and he didn't want to do that. He was married, a family man. And then there was Cabby Rosario, played trumpet. And like I said, they played at Sabby Lewis. New Bedford guys played at Sabby Lewis. And Cat Anderson, who went on, a lot of the guys went to Duke. Duke would call guys from that band, like Paul. Or Basie called Duke. Duke called Paul. Paul first went with Basie, then he went to Duke. So, Cat Anderson went on, became a famous trumpet player with Duke. He played his high notes. He and Maynard Ferguson, they played way up high. And every time Duke would play, and Duke came to play a lot, every time Duke would come to play, he played along with Cab and the Sabby Lewis band. He would get off and let Cab play with Duke, because he says, this is my favorite trumpet player, and this was Cab. But he didn't want to do that for a living, what these guys went through. He was family. And one time the Duke was playing here, and Cab invited the guys, there's somebody, guys over the house, Duke's band, and I'm sitting there with Cab, and Cat Anderson, the lead trumpet player for Duke, he's telling everybody, man, this is my favorite trumpet, Cab, and he's saying all this, and Cab whispers to me, if he thinks I'm so good, why don't he give me one of his horns? And they were funny. They had sense of humor all the time.
Yeah.
That's why they survived like that, too. This sense of humor. So anybody else you want to talk about? You through the experience? we could talk about guys that didn't left here that made it, if you don't know. Like I said, Jimmy Lombo. Jimmy Lombo and his bass player Porky Biddle, two basically Biddle brothers, Porky and Bill Biddle. Bill became famous up in Canada, and then he came back to New Bedford.
I knew Bill Brittle because my father played with him, and he'd be at the studio.
Great bass player.
I didn't know Jimmy Lombo. I knew who he was, but
well, Jimmy moved away to California. Like I say, he and Bill's brother Porky was a bass player. They moved there in California, and like I say, Jimmy played with Dinah Washington and got a band, not Earl Hines band, I forgot what band, a big orchestra. And Porky Brittle got involved with the TV and the studio bands and all that. So he played, and then he moved to Hawaii. So those guys left. They never came back. Well, Jimmy came when he was elderly to retired, but he wasn't around. And then his brother Ray Lombo was a piano player. And Ray told the guys, we got these instruments, the marching band. Said, no, why don't we play with Duke Ellington? And there was this man, Alvaro Dura, brilliant man. He liked classical music, but he played in the orchestra. So now for the Duke band music, they needed charts, and he was a brilliant man. He would play Duke Ellington record, and he'd listen to it, write all the charts, and give it to them. And that's how they started. Yeah. I was Duke Oliver band, and then it became the Skyliners. Frank Montero and Pete Montero took it over. Frank was a president of musicians union after. They took it over, and the band kept up to a few years ago. Every 4th of July, the recognition day came in, and they would play. Then that happened. Towards the end, they ran out of guys. They couldn't get enough guys to form a band. There weren't that many musicians.
We used to, before they played, we used to put their music together.
Yeah.
My brother Carl, my friend Michelle.
Yeah.
We'd put, first sax, second sax, trumpet.
Yeah.
We'd put it all together because they spent a lot of time at my father's house.
I can imagine. Because I always heard about them. And I got to know him when I was older, but as a kid, I always heard his name. And like I say, Joe said that he's the best clarinet player he's heard, and he's heard them all. And he's not the only one that said that about his clarinet player, but Joe would say that. And they sat side by side because they played the same. When they played in the orchestra, they both played tenor, alto, and clarinet. So they sat side by side. And Joe said he was. Yeah. So, but it was very interesting here in the music business those days.
I really don't think people really realize what musicians go through.
No.
How hard they work, and seriously. I mean, it is a fun job because it's music, this and that, but it's stressful. It's late at night. You're exhausted when you come back, and then you can't wind down.
Again, that's why I say I was so happy to meet you. He's somebody else that was around it. I grew up around it. They're my babysitters. Yeah, I was with them all day. I thought it was boring. In a summer day, they'd drive up to Mass Ave, sit in the cars, all the guys sitting out. Me, sometimes Phil's son would be too. So the other two of us would be sitting in the car, be walking around Mass Ave, while they were hanging out. But I was taking everything in. Yeah. They have to have that passion for that, And then like some of them gave it up, became like your dad, Joe. They came and do like a day job, but they knew they were going to get paid over it. But a lot of guys never did, and a lot of them succumbed to drugs. That was the thing.
I heard that. We heard that for years. My father would tell us that he lost so many friends to drugs. And I think I'd said it before, that they'd say, Lionel, try this. And he'd say, no, I'll stick with my beer. Yeah. And he thought about it later. He said, I'm glad I was scared. I was scared to do the drugs.
That was the same thing with Joe. He said no, and it ended up breaking up the friendship because Paul got tired of him trying to help him, so he left. He lived with Joe, and they were warring. They had to call white folks in the apartment, and then he couldn't take it anymore. And he, unfortunately, the day he had his funeral, Duke Ellington died that day. So Paul had nobody at his funeral, just Joe and family, because Duke didn't know Duke had been very sick, so they didn't tell Duke to Paul. In fact, Duke had two guys in the same funeral parlor in Harlem, Paul and his trumpet player, Trummy Young. two of his members were at the funeral parlor, and then they got buried the day Duke died.
Wow.
So Duke didn't know, but Duke took care of him, because he just wasn't dependable anymore.
And we saw the prejudice. My father saw a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
He saw a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
He'd be hurt when he'd think about it, but we saw it, and some people don't believe it. They think it's exaggerated.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah. But yeah, so now we don't see that anymore. No, we don't see that so-and-so's playing over here, so-and-so's playing in the Krishna.
Right.
You gotta go over there.
And I have to say, I taught something for 38 years, macrobiotics. It was started for world peace. It helped a lot of people, but God's got a time. Yeah. A lot of people passed away. God's got a time for everybody. But I got into macrobiotics because of music. Yeah. From traveling with the band and talking with Lena, I got so interested in World War II. She had all she would gone through, she told me. I saw her, and then she hugged me, and she says, God got me out. God's going to bring special people to you, Carol. Keep your heart open to meet them. And when I went to high school, that was my favorite subject, was history and problems of democracy. And I meet the Japanese man who was involved with music too. The Beatles went to him. John Denver was very friendly with him.
Yeah, you met people from over, and that's the thing with them. They were in a band with guys from all over the country, or some out of the country. A lot of Japanese players were in the bands, Yeah. So they went touring with guys from their hometown, Yes. So they experience all different backgrounds of different people.
And when you really think about it in life, when you see the musicians, how they were still friends with us. When I'm saying us, I mean myself, my brother. Yeah. And they were a lot older than us, but they kept in contact. Yeah. Andy Andrade, he lived in California. He died at 98. He was calling me, and I was putting on the speaker and talking about my father. He played for Johnny Carson and everybody, and it was just so much love.
Yeah. Well, like in my situation, I was always with them. The rehearsal, I'd be sitting there, and so when Joe and Paul left, all the guys in the band, Manny Rose, Dave, come on, Yeah. I was part of, they were used to having me, and Phil Edmonds' son, Jackie. They'd be taking us around with them. Same way. It didn't stop for us.
Yeah.
They were gone,
Well, Andy said to me, your father was all about music, but when he was with you and your brother, the three of you, it was just the three of you in your little pod.
Yep.
Your little, you're all by yourselves walking, and he'd be talking to you, and we'd be watching the three of you, and that's how my father was with us. It was.
A lot of musicians don't like that. I have a good story. Like Joe played with Machito for years, and then, like I said, Palladium every night. Machito, Tito Winter, Tito Rodriguez, the three bands would play, And then you'd see all kinds. See, the Palladium I could go. That was a nightclub. It was a tourist place. So we'd go, and then my wife and I, when we first got right there, kids, we were there all the time, And all the famous musicians, Dizzy and all them, would come in. They wanted to sit in with those bands. They play a song or two. In fact, there's a famous record called Kanya, where they're on Cannonball Adderley. The guy got an idea. All these guys coming out, we recorded them. So all that different songs, Joe Livramento, and then Cannonball Adderley, those are names, because they loved being there and going in and playing. They always loved to sit in and come out, And so you never knew who was going to be walking in, who was going to be playing there.
That was like my wedding. My father hired the Skyliners. But we had so many musicians, and they would say, we are attending the wedding, I'm bringing my horn. So many musicians brought their instruments for my wedding.
Yeah.
And it was really, it It was really nice.
Yeah, that was a thing of jazz improvisation, really, because so-and-so would have a gig, say your dad would have a gig someplace, you don't know who'd be coming in. Guys would come in with, oh, come on, sit in, come on, sit in. And it was funny because you'd be sitting there and say, wow, look who came in just now. Oh, I'm so excited. And then another guy would come in and say, look who came in. Oh, man. But they all got invited to play. They played with each other. They had that. They played. Oh, that's what I was going to say about Machito. So many years after Joe had passed, well, just shortly after Joe had passed away, but after he had left the band and retired, he came back here and everything. And so, like I said, the three bands played at the Palladium. And it was a jazz festival over in the western part of Massachusetts and put on by Symphony Hall. And they had them playing. They had different bands play all day long. So what happened, three sons, Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, and Machito's son, they got together and they got a band, one band. So they would go on the stage and Machito's son would come on and they would play Machito's music. Then the Tito and that. So my wife and I and my daughter, because my daughter worked for Symphony Hall, so she was involved with it. We were there. So when the artists got off, they had Strawberry Records had a tent where they would sell the records. You know, the artists would come, autograph all the records. So when Machito's son came down, he signed the records, and my daughter and I and my wife go over talk to him. I says, I want to talk to you. You wouldn't know him because you're too young. And but my uncle played for Machito for many years. He said, what's your uncle's name? I said, Machito, Joe Livamento. He started crying because he says, I never heard your uncle play. But he took me with his daughter every day out for ice cream and stuff like that. So like you said, they had that. That was proof of it, you know. He says, my older brothers tease me. He says, how can you have Machito's band when you never even heard that before? Yeah. So that's how they were.
I was when I first got married, I was at the policeman's ball. And Pete Montero said, all right, we're going to play the theme song written by a fellow musician, Lionel Soares. He's not here tonight, but his daughter's sitting over there in the pink dress. And I was like, oh, gosh. So I went home. I told my father, I said, Pete mentioned your name and let everybody know I was your daughter. And my father said, how did you feel about it, Carol? I said, the same way you would. It's like you like it.
Yeah.
It touches your heart, but in a little bit, it's embarrassing or something.
Yeah.
How would you explain it?
Yeah. But you just don't want that attention.
Right.
Yeah. You just it embarrasses you. Yes. But anyway.
But musicians are a great group of people.
Yeah, I don't want to keep it because we could go on forever. Get me started. I'll go on forever. Especially when I found somebody that knows what I'm talking about. Like you experienced it, being around them.
I know.
Seeing what they went through.
If we go on forever, they'll shut us off.
Well, they cut.
Oh.
Everything doesn't go on.
Oh.
It gets edited. We're just talking and getting recorded.
Oh, okay.
And then they. So, can you think of anything else? Trying to think of anybody we might have missed. Phil Barboza I mentioned. And there were Perry brothers that had a dance floor. Wasn't it Art and Matt Perry?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of people from back there that I heard of, Okay. Yeah.
The Pharaohs.
The Pharaohs, right? And then Lincoln Park, they'd have, in fact, and years back when I was a little kid, they had a Krishnet Park down the end of New Bedford where Fort Tabor is. Well, right above there, see all those little houses, those houses small, that was all woods. And they had an amusement park just like Lincoln Park. In fact, the trolleys would start at Lincoln Park, and this was the end. And they had ballrooms and everything. And I was a kid, but I can remember family going home and saying, Count Basie Duke and all those guys played there too. Then a hurricane wiped it out.
See, we weren't here.
It was a dance pavilion. A famous restaurant was on the dance pavilion.
We weren't here in the summers.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I never saw a hurricane.
Yeah. So the musician knew of New Bedford, the famous, because they did play here. Yeah, Lincoln Park had good band. They were real good because that name was Reis. No, seriously. Buddy Reis from Florida, he had a big band that played a Lincoln Pop. Was a
Yes.
band.
I remember that name very well.
Yeah, that was it.
See, hear it all the time.
Yeah, he was there all the time. Yeah. So there were a lot of orchestras. And then from the orchestras, when that fell through, that's when the jazz started. Combos, the quintets, improvising.
See, a lot of musicians hung at my father's house.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, they always hung out together. They were a group, they're friends. It wasn't like they came home from work and that was it. See you when I come work again. Yeah. They hung out there and told stories and jokes and teased, a lot of teasing.
You can't play all day. You can't play all night and then go home to bed.
Right.
You're all wired up and...
Right. Exactly. So again, I'm excited to have you and discuss all this stuff. Is there anything else you want to think of you want to mention?
No, I'm fine.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks again for coming.
You're welcome very much. This was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Fiber Optic Center's Jazz Podcast series with your host, Dave Reis. Please go to theartistindex.com for more information about the Fiber Optic Center, Dave Reis, or this 10-part jazz podcast series.